And Kathy is Associate Dean of the Syed School of Business, and she is co-author of the CEO report, Embracing the Paradoxes of Leadership and the Power of Doubt. And this is something that Kathy is going to share with us, the power of doubt within leadership. She's going to share our findings with us. And this report was presented at the World Economic Forum, Kathy, in 2015. So over to you, Kathy, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Well, it's a huge pleasure to be with you all. And I feel, in a sense, that as somebody who works at a business school, that I'm very much on the sidelines in all the discussions that you've been having this morning, because for once the world is looking not to political or to corporate leadership, but to health leadership. So it's very humbling to be here and listening to you all, and the discussion was really interesting so far. So Geraldine and Sinead asked me if I would talk a little bit about leadership in a crisis, because crisis management and leadership are two of the areas that I teach. And to say a little bit about how the COVID-19 pandemic could challenge and continues to challenge our sort of perceptions of leadership, and to test our sort of leadership capabilities. And I know from this group and from the discussion this morning that all of you are thinking very deeply about your own leadership and your own challenges. So to some extent, this set of reflections is designed really to allow you to consider that reflection and to place it perhaps in a slightly different way. And I'm going to ask you something which is really counterintuitive for anyone who lectures or speaks publicly, which is to get your mobile phones out and make sure you have them next to you, and that they're on, but you have to keep them on silent. Because at the end we're going to do something together which will help me further in my research and into some of the studies that I'm doing with colleagues at the business school. And I should say that the CEO report, which I'll talk about in a minute, was instigated by two of our senior professors at the business school, Tim Morris and Michael Schmetz, who continue to develop it with all of us at the business school, and it's very much a work in progress. Before the pandemic, as part of my sort of regular sessions with students, mainly with exec MBA students, I would ask them to think about their leadership presence. And one of the exercises that I would do would be to ask them to write down 2 or 3 words about the leaders in their organization or about their own leadership, and think about the qualities that they really admired in the people leading them, or qualities that they thought were important for themselves. And recently I've been asking the same thing in a different context. So while I'm speaking, I'd just like you to think about the 2 or 3 qualities that in the past you've really admired in leaders of any kind, either in a healthcare setting or in any setting. So for the students I surveyed, who come from over 30 countries, and some of whom are doctors or health professionals or working in the pharma industry, but many, of course, from many different industries, from nuclear power to sort of UN development agencies, so a huge sort of mix. Not surprisingly, words like vision, communication, strategic decision-making, these were all sort of front of mind. And I think these days, you know, that the old style command and control leadership has given way to much more of a preference for the leader as coach, as mentor, leader as enabler. You know, hard power is not as effective, or not seen as effective, as influence and persuasion. And these are highly prized at all levels of leadership, and I think by followers of leaders. But what about in a crisis? Because traditional crisis management teaches the need to lead from the front and to have a more directed style of leadership for the period of time of the crisis. To have clarity, to have the humility to say sorry. Of course, I'm sure many of you have gone through crisis management training. So putting people before profit and understanding how the effect that your words will have on others. to have a plan, to be flexible, to be willing to change, to be prepared, and we teach all this, of course. And it's different. We all know it's very different in practice. Michael Watkins, who's at IMD in Switzerland, has written extensively on this, and he talks about crises as being not so much black swans, but what he calls predictable surprises. So scenarios that could be managed, could be imagined, they could be explored in advance, and of course the global pandemic was one of these. Traditional scenario planning, which all of our students study in some form, emphasizes the sort of need and the ability to imagine the plausible, not just the probable, and take practical steps to prepare for it. So now is probably not the time to go into detail. I'm sure we all have stories about how the many scenario planning exercises by many governments left us scrambling for PPE, to the point where my local GP, I was fortunate enough to receive some masks from a Chinese alumna, and I had to take them to my local doctors because they didn't have any PPE at the time. So we all know that the best laid scenario planning exercises don't always work. And the ability to sort of take decisive action and prepare for the worst doesn't always lead through into actions that make a difference. So failure to prepare for predictable surprises is seen very much as being sort of multidimensional. There's a psychological element, there's an organizational element, and there are always sort of political stakeholder considerations. And these hold up our responses to a crisis. They stop us in many cases from recognizing the long-term solution and how we can take individual steps or collective steps to find those long-term solutions. So self-awareness about these blockages is increasingly, well, it's vital to make the small and the large differences that will help see us through the kind of crisis that we have at the moment. And all crises are characterized by a loss of control and sort of escalating failures, lack of information, panic, a sort of siege mentality. And above all, I think what we all feel at the moment is this intense scrutiny on everything we do and say. And for politicians, without making any comment on our world leaders and how they have been affected by public scrutiny, for politicians, this is excruciating, the pressure cooker atmosphere. Decisions taking place in a fog, people wanting you to be in charge. For every leader, the handbook, whatever you have, the slides you got on your crisis management training, they don't seem to make much of a difference when things are happening very quickly. So this is where we started to think at Oxford about how some of our research into the ways CEOs make decisions can help when it comes to developing pressure cooker crises, ones that build up slowly, but also perhaps help us reflect on the crisis that we have now. Because there's very little room for doubt, or we seem to think there's very little room for doubt when we have to take decisive action in a crisis. And that's when it's easy to reach for the sort of public promise, which gives immediate comfort, but is quickly found to be unachievable. So what has our sort of research told us? And this research, as Geraldine mentioned, was presented to the World Economic Forum back in 2015. With 150 CEOs from international companies, we did extensive qualitative surveys with them to find out how they made decisions on a daily basis, and whether, in particular, they ever doubted themselves. And if they did doubt themselves, how did they feel about that? How willing were they to admit it? And what did they do afterwards? What effect did those feelings of doubt have on them? And the results were really intriguing. I'm sure that Geraldine and the team will be able to pass the report on to you if you'd like to have it in detail. But I just want to mention a few of the findings from the report, because I think they help us think and reflect a little bit about how we might be making decisions now. So although there were 3 or 4 CEOs who said they never doubted themselves, the majority of that 150 did. And they doubted themselves on a regular basis, but they found that sense of doubt energizing. They said it actually helped them to make decisions and to make better decisions. It helped, in a sense, to sort of center them and give them a sense of momentum and purpose. It was a positive emotion. So paradoxically, doubt could act as a spur to positive change. And the respondents in the survey also recognized that their own personal characteristics could turn that positive effect into a negative. So we started to explore that a little bit more and ask some more questions around that. And we realized that it just depended on the personality type, the traits of those CEOs. So some had a sort of tendency to move very quickly to a final decision. They felt very confident, they were very fearless, and that meant that a sense of hubris could sometimes set in. If you're so confident of your instincts, if you fail to ask for the supporting data and you forge ahead, this is the entrepreneurial mindset. You know, the resource investigator who goes out and wants to do it and feels very self-confident in their ability. If you have that aspect to your character and the confidence in your communication skills, you need to bring in natural risk managers around you so that within your team, you have people who will challenge you in the right way and bring you to the point where you will actually do the thing that is counterintuitive for you. Other CEOs of the survey were very energized by the knowledge at their disposal. So for them, having the data, having the facts was very important. And they suffered from a sort of fearless or confident myopia when they were going too far in all their decisions. So they were unable to see the alternative view, and diversity of opinion is really important in this kind of situation. Understanding that if you feel you are very data-driven and you're in charge of that data, you might need to bring in someone who disagrees with your view of the data. And at the other end of the fearlessness scale, we have what we characterized as sort of leadership anxiety. People who were very senior but felt if they did not have all the facts, they would actually be paralyzed by indecision. So the tendency to keep going over the data would prevent them from making a decision and moving on, and turning that kind of anxiety into a sort of angst or soul searching, which delayed or distracted the organization from decision making. So in that situation, creating a leadership team where colleagues naturally reach out to support you and validate and create awareness and give confidence to nudge good decision making seemed to be really, really important. So talking about the power of doubt is counterintuitive, but I think Michael and Tim's research, which we've all contributed to, indicates that it can make you, in a sense, more resilient, as long as you have the self-awareness to harness it. It creates a sort of feedback loop which energizes senior leaders to go beyond their previous assumptions and to seek answers whilst in the decision-making cycle. And I think there's one other really interesting conclusion that we came to after analysing all these interviews from the CEOs, 10 of whom were women, by the way, which is a small number, but statistically significant given the fact that so few CEOs are women. So what we found was that the ability to understand the wider landscape beyond the organisation they were in seemed to be critical to their overall success. In a sense, this is another lens on stakeholder management, but we characterised it as a sort of ripple effect, like putting a stone, skimming a stone across a pond, where the touch is light, but the impact is very great. And we called this ripple intelligence, the ability to see the effect on the horizon of many different constituencies. So the attempts by all of us, by scientists, by intergovernmental organizations to sort of achieve consensus for regulation, for instance, around a COVID-19 vaccine, across those boundaries, across nations, across health systems, that's an example of where leadership with ripple intelligence is needed. And, you know, arguably it's in short supply in some jurisdictions. And I know that many of you involved in healthcare will be very worried about the need to make sure that that is upheld as the sort of regulation around vaccines continues to be an issue. So at the start of our degree programs, we put all our students through a stakeholder or crisis management exercise. It's one that I've been running for 7 years, and it's based rather appropriately for the moment on a fictional situation where a pharmaceutical company is conducting vaccine trials in India and encounters adverse effects with wide-ranging sort of personal, organizational, and political consequences. And we do try and draw out the lessons about forming alliances, understanding the difference between local and national politics, the interplay between regulation and business and society, the pressures of the media, and of course we never reach a perfect ending. And each time we run this exercise, there's a different outcome depending on the participants, which I suppose is a lesson that there's no perfect way. And, you know, one would hesitate really to say that you could ever follow a handbook. There's been a lot, I think, written about leaders in this crisis. And I think one piece of research which was conducted recently, again for the World Economic Forum, even suggested that it's okay as long as you're led by a woman. New Zealand, Germany, Finland, apparently the initial data shows that, interestingly, these female leaders, exemplified perhaps by Jacinda Ardern in New Zealand and Angela Merkel in Germany, they are risk averse when it comes to accepting high mortality rates, but they are not risk averse when it comes to thinking about economic factors. Now, this research has only just got underway, and it's a very small piece of research, but I just leave you with that thought. And I was reading recently in the British Medical Journal have an interesting leadership series. And so David Dalton, who has been CEO of an NHS trust, or several NHS trusts in the north west of England, and is on the Health Foundation governing body, pointed out that although we need to create chains of command and we need to think about how we minimize ambiguity in a crisis and how we don't misuse positional power, we should be thinking more about compassionate leadership and how from compassion can come strength, and that also deserves our attention and thought. So decisiveness is a great quality, but so is doubt. And I'd like to sort of end with an exercise, and in a minute we'll hopefully have some questions, but I'd like to just finish with an exercise that I did about 4 weeks into the pandemic with some of our students, and we're doing it with groups of students to try and gather some more data around leadership qualities now. So what I'd like you to do is, and I'm going to stop sharing my screen now so that the screen that Adele has can come up for you. Okay, so you should see this. What I want you to do is to go to your mobile phones and to log into www.menti.com, and you'll see that there's a code. Okay, so I want you to put in that code and answer the question, what are the 3 most important qualities we need from leaders at the moment in this pandemic? So let's see where we get. We have almost 300 people in this conference, so we've got an amazing opportunity to capture how we all think now. And we'll see if all our reflections line up with the reflections of our students at Oxford, which will be really interesting for me. Perhaps at UCD Smurfit, you can do the same thing. Okay, we're doing well. We're up to quite a few responses. I think we should keep going. And perhaps think about how different, if at all, this is from how you thought, let's say, a year ago. Okay, let's see if we can get over 150, because this is a fantastic thing about Zoom, that you can see exactly how many people are on the screen. So we have 282 people. So in business schools, you always try and get the evaluation forms, the feedback forms. You always try and get 3/4 of the audience to answer. So good. You're doing well. And we'll try, I think the team are going to try and capture this slide for us. So we'll have this at the end for all of you, I think. I see honesty coming up there quite highly. That's interesting. If you change your mind, you can do this several times on Mentimeter, but I'd like you to be upstanding citizens and only put in 3 words once. Let's see if we can get to 200. Geraldine, do we have time to do that?
I think it's good if we can wrap up there, and if we can form a conclusion from the responses we've received. Kathy, thank you.
Okay, that's great. So perhaps we'll stop there. We'll stop the slide. So really interesting, because I could see communication very high, but also empathy particularly high. And my students at the start, they were talking about vision and communication, but at the end, well, the most recent time we surveyed them, empathy was very high and accountability was very high. Higher than authenticity, accountability. And I think I'd just like to leave you with that thought, really, that however we make decisions and however we feel about the decisions we've made, that sense of accountability weighs heavily on all of us. And I feel very humbled, actually, that so many of you with responsibilities around the current crisis are taking your own accountability seriously. So thank you for inviting me. I don't know if there are any questions. We may be a little bit over time, but I'm very happy to answer them if there are.
Thank you very much, Kathy, and thank you so much to all of our delegates for sharing your thoughts on the 3 most important qualities that we need of our leaders now in this time of crisis. And Kathy, the research that you have carried out with the 150 CEOs is very insightful, and also in terms of what our delegates this morning have said surrounding empathy, which links in with compassion and the importance of compassion passion that you found. Also fascinating that doubt is energizing. So I think that's very positive for any leaders who are tuned in today, that to have doubt can be a good thing and can be extraordinarily positive. The importance of data and using data to inform good decision making as well. Data and the importance of data came up in our first session as well, and I think will be a continuing theme this morning. So Kathy, thank you so much for joining us from Oxford University. Unfortunately, we don't have time to take questions. We need to move on to our next panel discussion. So thank you so much for joining us, and we do hope you'll stay with us and help as a panel member to maybe answer some of the questions from our delegates. Thank you so much, Kathy.
Thank you, it's a pleasure.